Hey, what's up you guys, people of the internet, everyone who clicked in this very video. My name is Kat, and today I'm going to be reviewing not one, not two, but 3 books by an amazing author who I discovered in 2018 and who I would say is my favourite author of 2018, which is the lovely Alice Oseman. She's written and published 3 books and a webcomic, are Solitaire, Radio Silence, and I Was Born for This. I'm briefly going to talk about all that I like about Alice Oseman's writing in general in all 3 of these books, and then I'm going to dive into each of the books individually. I'll leave timestamps in the description of when I talk about which book in case you're only interested in one of them and not all of them. All of this will largely be non-spoilery. If I do mention something that's a spoiler, I will warn you beforehand. Let's get into it, shall we? So, generally what I love about Alice Oseman's writing, the writing style is great. And with that I mean that it flows very nicely. Like, with that I love it has the right tone. I often read young adult books where you can really tell it's been written by someone who's way older than a young adult. And also because Alice is still young, you can really feel in her tone of writing that she really understands what the young people are like. So I think the tone is really perfectly depicting of the group of people that she is voicing. Speaking of the group of people she's voicing, she writes some of the most diverse cast that I've ever read, and I really love it. She writes about such a diverse group of people that makes them really 3-dimensional characters. They are not just one part of their identity, they're all of their identity, and that includes a lot of diverse genders, sexualities, race, mental illnesses. So it's really great to see that full package in such a diverse and wonderful cast. And speaking of characters, I'm just gonna segue one point to another. Her characters are so fleshed out, they're so 3-dimensional, and it really makes you feel when you're reading like you are really getting to know these characters, and that's great because I would be friends with all of them. And all of these things, that it feels so young, that the voice is so perfect, and that the characters are so real, really makes it very relatable, I think, for a large group of people. I would say there's like a perfect age to read most of these books. Like when you're the age the character is, like you'll be able to relate more to it. But my mum's reading all of these. She read I Was Born for This, and she's currently reading Radio Silence, and she likes them a lot, so I don't think there's a perfect age. I think it's just an added great thing if you are that perfect age. Age and how relatable it is kind of important because these are very character-driven stories, all of them. The fuck is that? These are very character-driven stories, so if you don't like one of the characters, that might take something away from your enjoyment of the entire story. Sometimes you see references to things in books and you're like, ooh, but you're a bit old, aren't you? And it's just a little bit off. In this I think it's perfect. And the same thing goes for like character interactions, character dynamics. This is dialogue that I feel like real people talk this way, and that's obviously not the novel thing, but it is something that I really appreciate in a book, because there's a lot of books where you're reading and you're like, no real person would say this. So I'm gonna be reviewing these books in the order that I read them. The first of which I read was Radio Silence. Everything is falling apart. The first I read was Radio Silence, and if you don't know, this is about a girl who's really smart, who feels like she has a life lined up for her. She's going to university, but she's not really excited about university or passionate about a degree or school. The only thing she's really passionate about is making fan art for a podcast she loves. I think that's all I can say. Is that all I can say without spoiling? Can I say that it's a lad? I can, because it's on the inside flap, I think. Yeah. And it's also about this boy called the Lad, who's the maker of the podcast, who's a bit in the same situation as Francis, the main character, the protagonist is, where he is also very smart but doesn't really feel passion for going to university. So first of all, I'd say I've talked about this book in my books in university video, but I would still like to address the university thing a bit, because it is a really big part of the book. And I think it has a great message, because the message is that you don't have to go to university, that there's other paths for you if you feel like it's not the right time or the right place for you to be going to university and to be doing those things. I would also say this book, for me, what I loved most about it, because this is my favorite book of 2018. What I love most about it probably is how relatable the main characters are to me, Francis and Aled. I also am smart and think that that's the main part of my identity almost. And I love podcasts and weird fashion and internet culture and watching movies and just hanging out with friends and rambling about something for hours and making up weird theories about things. And I wish I could be their friend. So these are some of the most relatable characters I've ever read, and that's probably why I love this book so much. I love the podcast bits in this, because normally I'm not a big fan of like segments of something in a book, because I'll just skip over them because they tend to ruin the flow of a book for me. In this, it was perfect. Those podcast snippets, I loved them. And the podcast, I really just wanted to be a real podcast. It's very Welcome to Night Valley. Also a little bit, I don't know if you've heard of Dream Boy. It has the same kind of vibe, just a little bit less gay. Less explicit as gay, probably. And I think I would recommend listening to the audiobook. I myself haven't listened to the audiobook, but I've heard the snippets of the podcast from the audiobook, and those are great. So if you're into audiobooks, I would recommend picking this one up. What I like about all of these books actually is the mention of fashion all the time. Like, it definitely influences my fashion choices, because my style is very similar. But then like, I was reading this and I was like, yeah, I love these styles, and I found myself wearing an outfit and I was looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, have I become my lad last? Maybe. I'm not mad about it. The only thing I can really say about this, to not just make this a Gush review and actually have something flawed to say, is that sometimes it was a bit too dramatic, because this relies so heavily on the characters, and sometimes like a small thing a character did made such a big deal out of it almost. So that I would kind of say like, didn't love that. Like, ghost someone for a while, like it takes so long for them to like fix it, and it's kind of the same problem over and over again. And I do think that's realistic for Alad's character, because as someone who also runs from my problems, I understand how easy it is to lose contact after a small fight if you're not like living near each other. So I do think it's realistic, but I did think it was a bit annoying. But that's the only thing I can say that I didn't like much about this. Like I said in my Books in University video, I read this at the perfect time for me. Alad and Francis both turn 18 in this book. They're like, Francis is a senior or year 13, I seem to remember. Alad is going to university, and I read this in the summer when I turned 18, between me finishing high school and going to university. So for me this was a perfect time to read it, but we'll see if my mom also likes it, who isn't in that perfect time. My favourite scene, because I'm gonna do that for all these books, is probably Alad's birthday party. Like, I love that. It had the perfect amount of like weird, vague, what the fuck's going on, and also the emotional roller coaster that you went on without knowing what the fuck was going on. I loved it. That's one of the weirdest scenes, I would say, weirdest chapters, because it cuts from scene to scene very quickly and you don't really know what's going on. But I love that. I like that a lot. I think it's in vibe with the podcast a little bit. After loving Radio Silence so much, I decided to pick up Solitaire, which is Alice's debut novel. And I have to say I like this a little bit less than I liked Radio Silence. To be fair, I had high hopes after reading Radio Silence, but I wasn't as big a fan of this. This is about a girl called Tori, who's an introvert. She's a pessimist, a bit depressed, who meets a guy who's an optimist and a bit weird, and together they try to solve a mystery of who's hacking that school. This is even more character driven than Radio Silence was, and I didn't love the main character as much, which really stopped me from liking the story a lot, because Tori as main character didn't like do much for me, to be honest. And I feel like not that much happens in this plot. And that could have been intentional. I mean, it's called The Catcher of the Rye of the Modern Era, and I haven't read Catcher of the Rye, but I seem to hear from people that it's a story where not much happens. And I do guess it's more of an expose of character than really a plot-driven story. But because I didn't like the main character that much, that made it the overall enjoyment of this book a bit more difficult for me. And I think, well, since it's a debut novel, what she improved in her writing is to still make character-driven stories but with more plot points, or more of an actual plot, if that makes sense. I didn't relate to Tori as much, and that's with the perfect timing. If I'd read this when I was about 15, I probably would have related to Tori a lot, because back in 15 I was also like, I'm an introvert, I'm sad all the time. It's bad, but it's true. And at this time in my life where I read it when I was just 18, I related a bit more to Michael, who is a bit more optimistic and weird and bisexual. I would say I related more to other characters, and because I didn't relate to her, because it wasn't the right age, it felt a little flat for me. What I do really like that happened in this is kind of the meme culture still. I mentioned it a little bit before, where like is really perfect for the time that she wrote it in, and for this modern time with the internet and the memes and Harry Potter and whatever. And she mentions all of these things without feeling pretentious, like I'm mentioning Harry Potter because I know that's what the teens are into. It's more like, I like Harry Potter and it's something I'd talk about if I were Tori Spring. So I like that a lot, and I think that's still very good. For my favourite scene, it's kind of difficult because I don't remember much of the specifics that happens. This book felt for me like a lot of scenes kind of blending together, which is actually, if you think about it, good. It's not great for my enjoyment of the story, but it is great for like if you're trying to expose a character who's a bit depressed, because I know that when I was depressed I did feel like everything kind of blends together and nothing really stands out. So in that way it's good. It might also just be my shitty memory. But I would say probably, I know there was a few cute Michael and Tori moments where they were just becoming friends and they were hanging out. I like that. Hanging out maybe with Nick and Charlie and what's the other brother, Oliver. And I mean, probably the scene where they beat up Ben, that's the most emotion-laden scene for me. That was a good one. So after all, after the hype that I loved Radio Silence so much, this was a little bit of a letdown. I didn't hate it, but didn't love it. Because Solitaire was a bit of a letdown for me, I was becoming a bit afraid that maybe Radio Silence was just a one-off, you know? Maybe that was the only book that I loved so much because it was the most relatable thing I've ever read. And I was a bit hesitant to pick up My Boy, I Was Born for This. Also because the premise didn't interest me that much. It's a dual point of view between a girl called Angel, who's a very big fan of this band, The Ark, and honestly cares about the Ark more than she cares about her own life, and Jimmy, who's the frontman of The Ark, who isn't quite loving being in the band anymore. He has an anxiety disorder and he doesn't really know what to do about it. And he's struggling with band life, and their storylines kind of intertwine. And when I read that premise, I was kind of like, that sounds like it's going to be bad and fanficky, and I don't know if I'm interested in that because I haven't been really into a band since like 2013, 2014. However, I ended up really loving this. Because I thought I was going to relate only to Angel if I'd been way younger and still into the band culture, I thought I wasn't going to relate to this as much, but I ended up relating a lot to Jimmy. Also not, like, because I also have an anxiety disorder, it's way lighter than his is. His is pretty extreme, mine is very mild, but just the way of thinking he goes through with this anxiety is something that I did really relate to. And I do want to give like a trigger warning if you're easily triggered by reading like descriptions of panic attacks, because I know that I can get a bit anxious from reading about it, because anxiety for me really is a pattern of thought, and reading about things like this really gets that pattern of thought kind of in my head, which is not a good thing, but I still really like this book, which is weird, but you know, what are you going to do about it? So I do want to give a trigger warning for that. If you're easily triggered by that, it's not super graphic, but it does like happen. I related to Jimmy more, but I did also really like Angel as a character, and I really like Lister and Rowan, especially Lister. Like, I love him. He's probably my favorite, and again, that's like how great she flashes out characters. Like, Lister and Rowan and also Julia and Bliss are like full 3D, like I could touch them if they were here, you know, like they're great characters. Also, they have some great group of friends, like the dynamics between the arc, the band, and also between Angel and Julia and Bliss at the end, like I've really loved reading them. Yeah, and again, like the banter is great. That's one of my favorite things. I thought was interesting about their characters, about Angel and Jimmy, because they're kind of juxtaposed positioned against each other, right? Angel's biggest flaw, kind of, is that she's too selfless in a way that she cares more about other things than she cares about herself. She cares too much about the arc and not enough about her own life. Whereas Jimmy's biggest flaw is that he's too selfish. Not quite selfish as he doesn't care about other people, but selfish as he gets caught up in his own head and doesn't really notice other people sometimes. So I thought it was super interesting contrast between the two characters. And also in that two POVs, you sometimes have like little lines that are the same, and like, I'm all about that. And I think what was really great in this book was that their POVs were like the same enough that it didn't fuck with the flow every time we switch to another character. Because sometimes I get that in dual point of view books, but I feel like, oh, but I didn't want to, and I don't care about this character, you know? In this book I didn't get that, but the storylines were just unified enough to not mess with the flow, but divergent enough that it was still necessary to have 2 points of view, and not that it was like, this character is just is just redundant at this point. So that I thought was really great, writing wise. As with I wanted to listen to the university podcast, I also really wanted to listen to the ARC music. I'm just putting that out there. And what I really liked about them too is, like, again, the descriptions of fashion. Like, I've recently reread this and I was wearing an outfit yesterday that just, like, Jimmy would have been proud of that. Then I went shopping and I bought this hoodie. It's so stupid. And I was like, yeah, this is something that I could wear. So I bought it, and no regrets. Interesting about the fandom, I felt a bit weird reading this, because I was like, I haven't been in a Real People fandom in like ages, and it always makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. But at the end of reading this, I was also like, I'm drawing fan art of the arc like all the time, so I was like, what's the difference there? Why does that make me feel less weird? It's probably because just the idea that they're real people makes me uncomfortable. Because with fictional characters, you can do whatever. You can draw them however you like, you can make headcanons, you can ship them, and like, it's not going to make anyone uncomfortable. Whereas with real people, normally the real people aren't super stoked about shipping and things. So yeah, that's probably where the difference lies. But it's an interesting thing, I think. I think this is a cool message where, like, especially for the fangirls, where it's like, care about yourself. You're the most important thing. And you should acknowledge that you are the most important thing, and that's what you should focus your attention on. Same as in the Foxhole Court, where it's like, the court's not going to love you back. The band's not going to love you back in a fulfilling way. You should care for yourself. And also for the band, kind of like, if it's too much, just like, don't do it. Don't like work yourself to a burnout because it's not working. Yeah, the only complaint that I can have with this one is that some things weren't super necessary. Without spoiling exactly what happens, the thing with Lister at the end, I didn't really see where that came from, and I didn't quite see why that was necessary for the plot in order for it to be resolved. I guess it made the stakes a bit higher, but I felt like it was a bit weird and not quite necessary. My favorite scene was definitely the chapter where they jam in Jimmy's old garage, because before that you're going through such a roller coaster of emotions. Like, you're so sad when they're Jimmy, and then everyone's angry and everyone's shouting at each other, but everyone is like also scared and sad, and then they get into jamming and like they feel the happiness of the music again, and like it's so happy, and then it gets sad again, and it's a lot to take. And also when Angel and Julia and Bliss are at the bar and at the train station, whenever it's just the three of them together, like, I do really love that. Yeah, I really like this book too, and it was unexpected because after Solitaire I didn't think I was gonna like it so much. So maybe I just shouldn't think I like it with an Alice Oseman book and then I'll love it, and if I think I'm gonna love it, I'm not gonna. Who knows, we'll see what happens with book 4. The last thing she's written is a webcomic called Heartstopper, which is fucking adorable. It's about Charlie and Nick. Charlie is Tori's brother in Solitaire, and Nick becomes his boyfriend. That's not a spoiler because it's in Solitaire, which is published before Heartstopper, but Heartstopper is kind of their origin story, and it's so adorable. I don't have much of a review because I don't have much else to say other than it's so cute and light-hearted while still being emotional and touching on like serious things like the anxiety about coming out and mental health and all of those things and what it means to be bisexual and being confused about that. So I love that about it. It's so adorable and cute and it warms my heart a lot. Doesn't stop my heart, but it warms it. I love Alice's art style. I think the art style goes very well with the story, if that makes sense. My favorite scene is when they're on the beach and they're shouting. Oh, it's adorable. So when they're with, I think it's Charlie's birthday party, and they go bowling, that's adorable. Yeah, so I would recommend you pick up an Alice Oseman book soon, because they're great. Personally recommend Radio Silence the most, but if you're interested in the other two, also highly recommend picking them up. This is not spawn. Yeah, so that was it for this video. I will see you again at some point. Goodbye.